The night have received 14 Emmy nominations, winning 5. And if there's a mini-series that hooks you right from the first second, it's this one. Nasir is a 22-year-old college student living in Queens with his Pakistani immigrant parents. His father Salim drives a taxi, and his mother Safia works at a hotel. Naz is supposed to go to a party with his friends, but his ride falls through. Against his better judgment, Naz takes his father's taxi without permission. He drives to Manhattan to pick up his friends, but they've already found another ride. Feeling stupid and abandoned, Naz decides to explore the city. At a red light, a young woman gets into his taxi. Her name is Andrea Cornish, and she's clearly troubled, crying, asking him to drive anywhere. Naz should have kicked her out, but he's immediately attracted to her. Andrea directs him to a gas station where she buys beer. Then she leads him to the beach. Actually, just a small waterfront area. They drink, they talk, and Andrea pulls out drugs. She has heroin, cocaine, and pills. Naz has never done hard drugs before, but Andrea is persuasive. They get high together, and the night becomes a blur of drugs and attraction. Andrea takes him back to her apartment on the Upper West Side. The apartment is expensive, clearly way above what a young woman should be able to afford. Andrea continues giving Naz drugs and they have sex. During foreplay, Andrea pulls out a knife and asks Naz to hold it against her throat. She seems to enjoy the danger. Naz blacks out from the drugs. He wakes up hours later, disoriented and confused. Andrea is nowhere to be seen. He stumbles around the apartment calling her name. Then he finds her in the kitchen. Andrea Cornish is dead. She's been stabbed 22 times and there's blood everywhere. The knife from their sexual encounter is on the floor covered in blood. Naz panics. He runs around the apartment, touching everything, contaminating the crime scene. He finds his clothes, gets dressed, and flees the building. And then everything goes wrong. Naz drives only a few blocks before realizing he's forgotten his inhaler. He's asthmatic. More importantly, he's high, scared, and making terrible decisions. Police officer Brian Williams pulls him over for driving erratically. Williams searches the taxi and finds the knife, the murder weapon. Naz is arrested immediately. Naz is processed at the police station. Detective Dennis Box, a seasoned investigator, takes over the case. Box is good at his job and he immediately sees problems with Naz's story. Naz can't explain the night coherently. He remembers fragments. Andrea getting in the taxi, going to her apartment, taking drugs, having sex, but the timeline is fuzzy and he can't account for several hours. Box interviews Naz multiple times. Each time Naz's story changes slightly, not because he's lying, but because the drugs scrambled his memory. To Box, this looks like a guilty person trying to cover his tracks. Meanwhile, Naz's parents are frantic. Salim discovers his taxi is missing and files a police report. When they learn Naz has been arrested for murder, their world collapses. The family can't afford a good lawyer. They scrape together money for a criminal defense attorney, but the lawyer realizes this case is too big for him. He refers them to Allison Crowe, a high-powered defense attorney. However, Crowe meets with Naz and immediately sees problems. The evidence is overwhelming. His DNA is all over the crime scene, he was found with the murder weapon, and he has no alibi for the time of death. Enter John Stone, a small-time lawyer who handles DUIs and minor cases. Stone was at the arraignment hoping to pick up easy cases, but he becomes fascinated with Naz's situation. Stone is not a good lawyer in the traditional sense. He's desperate for money. He has eczema on his feet that makes him constantly uncomfortable, and he's never handled a murder case. But he's also the only person who seems to believe Naz might be innocent. Naz is sent to Rikers Island to await trial. This is where the real nightmare begins. Rikers Island is hell. Naz, who has never been in trouble, is immediately marked as a target. He's young, educated, and clearly doesn't belong there. The other inmates sense his weakness immediately. They steal his food, threaten him, and make it clear that he needs protection. In prison, protection comes at a price. Freddie Knight runs Naz's cell block. Freddie is intelligent, well-read, and absolutely ruthless. He's serving life for murder, and he's built an empire inside Rikers. Freddie takes an interest in Naz, but his help comes with strings attached. Freddie protects Naz from the other inmates, but he expects loyalty in return. Slowly, Naz begins to change. He starts working out, he learns to fight, and he begins adopting the mannerisms of the other inmates. Back in the outside world, Stone investigates the case. He visits Andrea's apartment building and interviews neighbors. He learns that Andrea was involved with drugs, that she had multiple boyfriends, and that she often brought strangers home. Stone also discovers that Andrea owed money to dangerous people. She was living beyond her means, and her lifestyle was funded by questionable sources. Detective Box conducts his own investigation. He's thorough and professional, but he's also convinced that Naz is guilty. Box focuses on building a case against Naz rather than exploring other possibilities. The prosecution, led by Helen Weiss, is preparing for trial. Weiss is competent and ruthless. She sees this as a straightforward case. Young man meets girl, they do drugs, he kills her in a drug-fueled rage. The evidence against Naz continues to mount. The prosecution has DNA evidence, the murder weapon, and no credible alibi. They also have Naz's behavior after the murder, fleeing the scene, contaminating evidence, and lying to police, Stone struggles with the case. He knows he's in over his head, but he can't abandon Naz. He continues investigating, following leads that more experienced lawyers would ignore. In prison, Naz is changing rapidly. The scared college student is disappearing, replaced by someone harder and more dangerous. He gets into fights, he learns to intimidate other inmates, and he begins using drugs to cope with the stress. Freddy becomes both Naz's protector and his corrupting influence. Freddy is brilliant. He reads philosophy, he understands the system, and he's accepted his fate. He teaches Naz that survival in prison requires becoming someone else entirely. Naz's relationship with his parents deteriorates. They visit him in prison, but they can barely recognize their son. The soft-spoken college student they raised is gone, replaced by someone who looks and acts like a criminal. Stone's investigation uncovers more details about Andrea's life. She was involved with multiple men, she used drugs regularly, and she had enemies. Stone finds evidence that other people had motive to kill her. Nonetheless, the prosecution isn't interested in alternative theories. They have a suspect, they have evidence, and they want a conviction. The system is designed to process cases efficiently, not to find the truth. The trial begins. The prosecution presents their case systematically and effectively. They show the jury crime scene photos, DNA evidence, and testimony from the arresting officers. Naz's transformation is complete. He arrives at court looking like a hardened criminal, muscular, tattooed, and intimidating. The jury sees him and immediately assumes he's guilty. Stone tries to present alternative theories, but he's outmatched by the prosecution. His investigation has turned up interesting leads, but he lacks the resources and expertise to develop them into a coherent defense. The prosecution calls witnesses who testify about Naz's behavior the night of the murder. They paint a picture of a young man who was high, violent, and out of control. Stone's cross-examinations are clumsy and ineffective. He's clearly not used to this level of legal combat, and the prosecution scores points repeatedly. In prison, Naz has become fully institutionalized. He's no longer the scared kid who arrived months ago. He's learned to survive, but survival has required him to become someone his family doesn't recognize. The media coverage is intense. Naz's Pakistani heritage becomes a subplot, with talking heads debating whether his religion and ethnicity make him more likely to be violent. Stone's investigation finally produces results. He discovers that Andrea was involved with a financial advisor named Ray Halla. Hallie was embezzling money from his clients, and Andrea was helping him launder it. Stone also learns that Andrea had a violent ex-boyfriend named Trevor. Trevor has a history of domestic violence, and he was angry that Andrea had ended their relationship. More importantly, Stone finds evidence that someone else was in Andrea's apartment the night of the murder. Security cameras show a man entering and leaving the building around the time of the murder. However, presenting this evidence is complicated. Stone lacks the resources to fully investigate these leads, and the prosecution fights every attempt to introduce alternative theories. The trial continues with testimony from forensic experts. The prosecution's case is solid. Naz's DNA is everywhere, the murder weapon has his fingerprints, and he has no credible alibi. Stone calls his own expert witnesses, but they're less impressive than the prosecution's experts. Stone's budget is tiny compared to the district attorney's office, and it shows. Naz's parents testify on his behalf. They describe him as a good son who never got into trouble, but their testimony is undermined by Naz's appearance. He looks nothing like the boy they're describing. The prosecution rests their case. They've presented overwhelming evidence of Naz's guilt, and they're confident in their victory. Stone presents his defense, focusing on the alternative suspects he's identified. He argues that Andrea was involved with dangerous people who had motive to kill her. However, Stone's presentation is disjointed and unconvincing. He has interesting theories, but not enough evidence to support them. The jury looks skeptical. The prosecution's closing argument is devastating. They systematically address each of Stone's theories and explain why they were implausible. They paint Naz as a young man who got high, lost control, and committed murder. Stone's closing argument is passionate but ineffective. He asks the jury to consider reasonable doubt, but he hasn't provided them with a credible alternative theory. The jury begins deliberations. Both sides wait anxiously for the verdict. In prison, Naz prepares for the possibility of conviction. He's made peace with the idea that he might spend the rest of his life in prison. In some ways, he's already adapted to that reality. The jury deliberates for days. They're split on the verdict, with some jurors convinced of Naz's guilt and others harboring doubts about the prosecution's case. Stone continues investigating even during the trial. He discovers more evidence about Andrea's complicated life, including her relationship with a stepfather who may have been abusing her. The breakthrough comes when Stone finds Dwayne Reed, a man who was in Andrea's apartment building the night of the murder. Reed admits he was there to buy drugs from Andrea, and he saw someone else leaving her apartment. However, this evidence comes too late to affect the trial. The jury has already begun deliberations, and introducing new evidence would require a mistrial. The jury reaches a verdict. They're deadlocked. The judge declares a mistrial, which means Naz won't be convicted, but he also won't be exonerated. The district attorney's office decides not to retry the case. They don't want to risk another hung jury, and they're not confident they can get a conviction. Naz is released from prison, but his life is destroyed. He spent 8 months in Rikers, and he's been transformed by the experience. He's no longer the innocent college student who borrowed his father's taxi. His relationship with his parents is strained. His father's taxi business has been destroyed by the negative publicity. His mother can barely look at him. Naz has become addicted to drugs during his time in prison. He's learned to survive in a violent environment, but he can't readjust to normal life. The show ends with Naz walking through his old neighborhood, but he's a stranger there now. He's been changed by his experience with the justice system, and there's no going back to who he was before. The series finale doesn't answer whether Naz killed Andrea or not. We're left with the same uncertainty that haunted the entire case. Maybe he did it in a drug-fueled blackout. Maybe someone else killed her, and Naz was just unlucky enough to be there. But that's the point. The night of shows us that sometimes the truth doesn't matter. The system processed Naz Khan like a piece of meat, and by the time it was done with him, he was no longer the person who might have been innocent. What did you think about the ending? Do you believe Naz was innocent, or do you think he actually killed Andrea? Let me know in the comments below.